So one of the most critical elements that you can do in preparing your business is really um, minimizing your direct involvement, right? If you can't take successfully 2 weeks off and take a trip to Europe and things not fall apart, you basically have a job, not a company. And so um, one of the things that really is no regret, in my opinion, regardless of whether it's an uncertain environment or you want to sell today or you don't want to sell today, is dealing with that key person risk, trying to minimize the downside associated with stuff that's just in your head, relationships that only you have, whatever, so that the business can do well and thrive independently of you.
Craft Your Life is a radio show for the tenacious, the bold, and those who refuse to settle for mediocrity. We bring together visionaries, game changers, and relentless go-getters who are crafting their lives, businesses, and relations in pursuit of excellence. If you are ready to shatter limits, embrace the amazing, and live life on your own terms, this show is for you. Each episode delivers actionable insights, inspiring stories, and unfiltered conversations that will ignite your drive to win a life worth dying for. Tune in and get ready to live viciously. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Craft Your Life radio show. I'm your host, Matt Kuehlhorn. Today's guest is David McCombie III, entrepreneur, investor, and advisor. He's the founder and CEO of the McCombie Group, where he helps mid-market businesses and owners scale, exit, or level up through smart strategy and precision execution. David, I'm really excited for our conversation, man. Already in the pre-warm up, I'm just jazzed. I hope the listeners are ready. I think it's going to be fire for anybody that's in the market for buying, selling a business. There's going to be a lot of nuance there, but more intentionally is around this idea of just designing a lifestyle and how do we use our businesses to do that. So thanks for joining, David.
Sure, it's great to be on. Thank you.
Yeah. And I want to give a little bit of a context because I mean, you write as a contributor for Forbes. You've been featured on the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. You have authored "Selling Your Business with Confidence." I mean, you're no beginner. Let's just say that. Like you've gone deep. How did everything start for you?
Well, it started in a lot of ways accidentally. So as context, I started my business 15 years ago, as of about a month. And
Awesome.
I was a consultant at McKinsey and Company. I lost my job in 2010 and ended up just forming the company and getting a website just to kind of figure out things, in the interim. And I ultimately realized that, I had the entrepreneurial bug. I liked the freedom and I liked the ability to control my destiny. And it did take a little bit of, twists and turns to get to today. Definitely had a lot of lessons and mistakes that I made, over that period. But really realized that, the traditional corporate route just really wasn't the fulfillment that I was looking for. It wasn't um, what I envisioned for my life. And so, over that time period, I basically started um, doing private equity investments on an individual basis, and did a handful of those different investments, and ended up transitioning about 6 years ago to purely doing advisory work for a variety of personal reasons, and going to the purpose of this podcast, really around kind of those introspective questions of what do I want my life to look like? I was on the plane
Yeah.
all the time. I had a young family, and it just really wasn't the life that got me excited every morning to wake up to.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I dig that quite a bit. You have a focus on mid-market. Can you define what that means and then go into why?
Sure. So the mid market, at least in my book, we define as companies between 10 million and a billion, right? It's not a small mom and pop, but it's also not, some big multinational. And where the implication really lies is, at least when we talk about selling a business. I used to work in Citigroup doing investment banking, and there every client was a multi-billion-dollar client, Every client had a team of MBAs. Most of them were former investment bankers themselves. Versus when you talk about an entrepreneur, um, they are both economically and emotionally invested in their business, right? It's their baby, and they may have all of their eggs in that one basket. And therefore, the experience is much less about just getting to the technical answer quickly, but it's really around the psychology, it's really around the education of them to help them feel confident moving through through the process. I'm based in South Florida. And so for me, the overwhelming majority of the type of companies that exist down here fit that mid-market arena. And so I personally, aside from the business focusing on it, going back to the intentional lifestyle design, theoretically in terms of what I do, the most profitable type of work is to do repeat work with a single private equity firm or a couple private equity firms, right?
Hmm.
But I get a tremendous amount of fulfillment working with a business owner and helping them achieve a much better outcome than they could on their own. And so, it's not just about how much you can make from it or how efficient you can deliver the service. For me, there's an actual element of practicing my craft and having an impact on real people's lives. And one of the things I'm most proud of is at my wedding, and I've been to other wedding. I've had clients attend. So it's more about having a relationship as opposed to just purely providing a service.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine on the large scale, you get professionals around the table, it becomes very transactional, and yet we're on the very precipice. I think it started, but a massive wealth transfer of individuals, of family businesses that are shifting hands, and there's a lot of emotion and identity wrapped up in that. Is that where you're alluding to, like, make it better? Like some of that is taking into that relational account. And I mean, at the end of the day, like business is very personal. Um, because I'm just looking for, unraveling that because there's absolutely a transactional side. Like numbers have to line up. The balance sheet has to look a certain way to even be at the deal table. And then
Yeah.
what else goes into it?
So I think it's really around when you don't when you're more of an agent, meaning you're an employee of somebody else, you may have some of your net worth in, um, you can often engage with questions, financial decisions in a much more objective, logical way, much closer to a computer making a decision, right? But when you talk about um, the factors of you know everybody's baby is the most beautiful baby. Um, Particularly, for example, when you're going through due diligence and people are being very critical of it, um, there's a lot of emotions that come into the picture, right? And if you think about it, going through a sales process, aside from that defensive element, has a number of other things that provide a tremendous amount of stress on a business owner. First and foremost, it's typically a larger amount of money than they've ever dealt with in any single negotiation, right? um, they typically are not sleeping well because it's such a labor intensive process, even with an advisor, that functionally they're working two jobs, right? And it's really imperative that their numbers are strong during the sales process. So you start stacking all those things. And then even things like emotional tells, if you think about like from a poker standpoint, a professional buyer, and almost all buyers are professional buyers of some sort, are able to easily read things like your cadence of responding, your body language, how you react just in terms of the look on your face when they're throwing out, a number or whatnot. So you put all those things together, and in a lot of ways, a business owner is under the influence of a cocktail of emotions that doesn't make them at their best when they're in the sale process than something that's completely unemotional and objective. And it's the reason, if you think about why doctors don't operate on their own children. Well, it's because there's too much emotions involved, and it's more likely that they're going to have a bad outcome than if it's just a totally objective experience.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. You know, personally, I haven't, well, I kind of sold a component of a business, but I've been more interested in exploring acquisitions. And so as I watch my own trajectory, it's a skill set of communication because I'm working with individual owners that are very close to their babies. We're talking fairly small businesses.
Sure.
And it's always been that emotional journey. Like, I've only had a few interactions that I've actually gotten close. One of them was to the point of like, "I want to sell to you." And I'm like, "Great." Like, there's a breakthrough right there because that is the relationship. That is taking it slow, doing the dates, right? In order to make sure there's an alignment. And then the last piece, or not the last piece, but the ongoing piece is the valuation. That's always been a difficult piece for me. Like, I have yet to find where an owner's reality of what their baby is valued at is in reality with a market.
Yeah, 100%. And that's one area where, implicitly it's easy for them to take offense of, hey, you're calling my baby, not worth what it
Yeah.
should be. And that's where there's often value of surrounding themselves with professionals that can help educate them, um, and to also insulate them from the buyer vis-a-vis some of those different emotions, some of which are just unproductive, right? I mean, if you get angry and tell the person, hey, that's an insulting offer, um, that may kill some opportunity as opposed to kind of constructively dealing with it and trying to explore whether there is a pathway across, both both individuals.
Yeah. Yeah. David, let's frame it, for listeners who, let's say, I do think a majority of listeners are entrepreneurs. I think that we have some businesses and, they could be at different stages in the business life. But from your perspective and thinking intentionally about, how do we utilize a business to really support a lifestyle that we want? And and whether that's like running the business efficiently so it's not sapping every moment that we're up, or preparing it for going to market, looking for an exit that's going to give us financial wealth that's going to, change a trajectory there. What would you identify as like critical components for that owner?
Yeah, look, I think whether it's your business strategy, preparing to sell, or even kind of choosing the right path for yourself, the same general principle of reverse engineering applies. What I mean by reverse engineering is, where do you want to be? Where are you currently at? And developing intermediary milestones between point A and point B, right? And I find a lot of people, in terms of, uh, really don't spend any time on determining where that end goal is, right? And envisioning with a lot of vivid detail around what it is that they want for their life, what they want for their business, um, as well as thinking about the implications of those different decisions. It's great to say I want everything, but the reality is that most things in life are trade-offs, right? And so really getting clear about what it is that is important to you, how much is enough. Those are all, I think, relevant questions that are not objective, right? Everybody has a different answer, but I think are, really, um, important. But what I often find is, the average entrepreneur, because the urgent pushes out the important, and often because it's such an emotional decision, doesn't really give a lot of time to thinking about that. And interestingly, in my experience representing sellers, only about 25% come to me with having done any preparation to sell the business. And it kind of blows my mind because you think about, before you sell your house, you at least put a coat of paint on your door, you pull some weeds. But my interpretation is that, not only is the urgent stuff, blocking out a lot of the other time blocks that they could be spending, thinking more strategically, but it takes too much emotional bandwidth often to kind of confront that, yes, this is the path that they want to take. And so what I often find is why they ended up selling was some type of external life event occurred. it's either, a very close family member or friend, passed. And so, they kind of rethought their priorities. Some other life event may have occurred, such as, a divorce or, somebody getting sick or, whatever it might be. Um, and so, there's huge value at stake, in terms of both your financial returns, but also kind of living the best, um, lifestyle for yourself, by, taking that time to really be introspective around what it is you really want.
That's yeah. So what's coming up for me is pretty wild, man, because that is such a profound question to dig into. And I understand because I've lived it. Like, why I wouldn't dig into that question is because, A, I'm busy. B, I am just running around attending the urgent, staying busy. And then, I think there's probably another underlying reason of, my business. And I've been in business with my one entity so far of Cooler for 10 years. It's been a wild journey. And in that journey, like, I have had, like, the identity wrapped around the grind. Like, I haven't even wanted it to be super successful because I'm, like, attached to the grind, right? Now that I resolve that and I can open up to different layers, then I go through the business trajectory. But there's so much of identity just wrapped up with the doing and the being. Like, how have you in your life, like, distance that? What were the moments that allowed some of that self-awareness and space to spend time on answering that question?
Look, it's something I'm still struggling with because, quite frankly, you can academically say, "Hey, I'm not my job. I am not my role." But in terms of how you actually react in the day to day and kind of what you prioritize, I at least continually find it challenging. Um, for me, I think what has been really interesting and there's a couple different concepts that helped me. One is, Jeff Bezos has a framework that he's talked about, which is about regret minimization. So in other words, in when he's 80, is he going to regret having taken the chance or not regret having taken the risk, right? And there's a lot of different options of I could play it safe or I could do something. And so that's, I think, one reference point that I think is really helpful. The other is, a little bit morbid, but really just confronting your mortality, right? If you only had a year left to live or uh, a week left to live, kind of what would you want spending it on? What would you want to spend it on? And that really has a great way of crystallizing what's important, um, around, what is it that really matters versus what are, just more optics. And at least for myself, what I realized is, a number of years back, is that, you know, when you start peeling back the onion and say, well, why am I really doing this? A lot of the decisions were really around my image in the eyes of other people. And this is what's expected of me, or this is what, success is supposed to look like, or whatever it is, which often could be divorced from, or sometimes totally opposite from what I really wanted. And so, I think it's also one of the advantages of, now in my 40s, getting a lot more comfortable with, it's not wrong or right, but I like this, right? And it's just, rather than try to fight the tide, and force myself into, um, situations or a personality that are just not, energizing to me. So, that's those, particularly over time, have been, the mechanisms that have really helped me kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and realize that, what really matters to me is, of course, I want to be able to provide financial stability and independence to my family, ultimately. But, absent that, once you kind of reach a sufficient level, what really motivates me is I want to work on things that I learn, projects that I learn, with, and with people that I admire. And, for me, that, really fills my cup. And, um, but, there's a lot of other people that may have a very different perspective on it for themselves.
Yeah. I loved what you said at the very beginning where you were talking about just it's a what I heard was it's a process. Like this question of what do we want is an ongoing question. Like we can get like tracking like okay, I want to go to A, I'm at B now, so now I'm going to put together the machine and the steps and I'm going to get to A, but along the way I'm going to reflect a little bit. I'm going to re-ask and restate the question and maybe that has me dial in a little bit one way or the other. Um,
I also think it changes, Matt, right? I mean, over
it
time,
does.
particularly as you get more successful, when when money is scarce and you've got a family that's depending upon you for survival, you have a very different mindset than once you already have a level of comfort and you don't need to do those things.
That's
And
right.
that to me is where the implication really comes, which is once you financially no longer need to do those things, then that is a conscious decision, an intentional decision that you basically are prioritizing, one thing over it could be your family or, something else in your life. And so I definitely have found that particularly pre and post kids, my priorities have changed tremendously. But also as, things have as I've gotten traction and all that, what would motivate me before is very different than, today.
Yeah. Yeah, I dig that. What would you say to somebody, and I want to go into the realm of variables. And so I guess to put it in context, let's say there's a business owner out there and maybe they're running a good solid multi seven figure style business. They've had some success and they're looking at, maybe flipping the chapter and being like, okay, how do I exit this thing? And, I don't have somebody that I'm super close to that I'm just going to hand this down. So I'm going to package it for market. So two questions are going to pop out of this and we'll chase the feeds. But one is in today's environment, there's a lot of wonkiness. One of my mentors would call it balls rolling in the street. When you're driving down and you see a ball rolling in the street, you're going to slow down. Maybe there's a kid or a dog chasing, like there's just variables. Lots of those are happening right now, almost daily. And a sensational news, title flashes the screen. It's like, oh my gosh. So that can bring up a bit of uncertainty. What would you
Sure.
say to owners that are, now starting to prep their babies for market? Does the game change? Has things shifted? Can we be as certain as we were once with, designating what we want as an outcome?
Um, there's no doubt that there's a lot of uncertainty. Um, I guess my position is that it often is the same actions that you would take to prepare your business for sale that are prudent to do regardless of whether you want to sell it or not. It makes it more
Yeah, I agree.
financeable, it makes it more profitable, and often it makes a better lifestyle for you, right? So a lot of times those things are all interrelated because if you think about um, a buyer is not looking generally, at least in the mid-market business, to buy a job. They're looking for a going concern, meaning something that can thrive independently of the owner. And so one of the most critical elements that you can do in preparing your business is really um, minimizing your direct involvement, right? If you can't take successfully 2 weeks off and take a trip to Europe and things not fall apart, you basically have a job, not a company. And so um, one of the things that really is no regret, in my opinion, regardless of whether it's an uncertain environment or you want to sell today or you don't want to sell today, is dealing with that key person risk, trying to minimize the downside associated with stuff that's just in your head, relationships that only you have, whatever, so that the business can do well and thrive independently of you. Because some business owners will decide, and in particular, there's certain industries that, for different reasons, don't really sell at a really high multiple, where the better outcome might be for them to find a professional manager and for them to continue owning it, and maybe that manager earns some equity in over time, right? But that's only an option if you've got that foundation where the business can continue along, sustainably without you. And at the end of the day, a business, regardless of what it does, is fundamentally about its people. But that's also what makes business complicated, right? It has a ton of people with different motivations and interests and personalities. And, quite frankly, that's where the both opportunity and challenge lies.
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Hey everybody, this is Luke from Cooler Garage Doors. Just want to take a quick second to talk about our sponsor, Sommer Garage Door Openers. In our opinion, Sommers are the highest quality product on the market today. We recommend them for all of our residential garage door installs because of the variety of features they include, such as Wi-Fi connectivity and safety features such as a fixed chain, which moves along a secure rail to ensure your garage door opens quietly and safely. Click on the link in the description to learn more about Sommer Garage Door Openers.
What would you say to that individual? Like, what are some of the critical pieces, boil it into top three or extend from there, as far as, I mean, you mentioned 25% have maybe done some planning prior to selling, but what are some of the steps that somebody listening to this and they're like, okay, let's look at this, think about the identity shift. Let's look at, where I really want to go and let's start packaging this thing. What are some of the components, maybe internal and external,
Sure.
um, that somebody needs to be thinking about?
Sure. So I think the way to think about that is to break up the world into like short-term things. If you want to, if you need to sell or want to sell in the next 12 months, short-term things versus longer-term things if you have the luxury of time. In terms of the short term, the most important thing is really making sure that you have your financials in good shape. Um, Making sure that whether it's a bookkeeper or an accountant that is helping you prepare everything and maintain it, um, in good condition. And most people think about the world from a cash basis because that's what taxes are associated with. But the reality is almost all buyers are going to look at your business on an accrual basis, meaning they try to match the revenues with the costs together to really get a true sense of somebody's profitability. So that's one element. The second, at least over the short term, are things that ultimately some businesses have deal breakers, right? It could be a big lawsuit that's over them. It could be a regulatory investigation that they have. And so one of the biggest value drivers you can do is trying to work to address that, right? So rather than making your business as efficient as possible, to me, I'd prioritize my time on eliminating the value detractors that may make the business unsellable in the first place. And then lastly is really around trying to minimize uh, the risks in a transition. So reducing the dependency of the business on you. What do I mean by that? I mean by ideally trying to find somebody else who can um, uh, on the team who can take a leadership role, effectively delegating to the different people, being being able to actually take a vacation for a couple weeks at a time. Um, it's a process that obviously takes time, um, but it's one of those things that um, it makes sense regardless. Now, if you have the luxury of time, what I think makes the most sense is to really focus on looking at, where's the puck going, not where is it currently, right? So, where do I think, based upon my research or talking to investment bankers, the market is going to value the most? So, if the market values, service more than new construction, well, focusing your time and energy on growing your business specifically in that area, as opposed to putting your efforts like spreading it like peanut butter across, all the different kind of business opportunities that you may have. So having that luxury of being able to say, okay, this has more profitability, this has more growth potential, this is going to be more valued by the market, are all elements that you can basically use to guide you of where you want to be, and then ultimately holding yourself accountable with baby steps from getting to point A to point B. Another
Yes.
one that I think is really important is customer concentration. So one factor, but it typically takes, a number of years to adjust customer concentration. One factor that often kills deals is when, one customer has a dramatic percentage of the revenues. And you got to put yourself in the buyer's shoes, which is, you write a big check and then on Monday you wake up and you lost that customer and you basically flushed a lot of money down the drain. And so, thinking about that, it's around how do I strategically grow all the accounts except the big one so that, over time, there's more balance and there's less risk, associated with, that, the highly concentrated, customer position. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of other things that are very specific to, to people's businesses and kind of the opportunities they may have. But, at a high level, those are things that pretty much any business owner should be able to apply and get benefit from.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, man, and I wanna, we'll start putting little bow ties on our conversation, but it would be amiss if I didn't ask you around that identity shift, and so I would imagine you've seen some client journeys, where they came to you maybe prepped, maybe not prepped, and then they go through a process, now they've exited, and I'm just curious, like, what have you seen in you know, people's identities? How have people navigated that change? What is the benefit and even some of the bummers on the other end of that
Yeah.
exit? Because that changes, I mean, it changes everything
So I think
potentially.
it's really important that people take the time to kind of sort through what's life after the sale going to look like. The reality is no matter what, your life is going to look different, right? Before you could do whatever you wanted. Now even if you continue in the company, you're going to have a boss. There's going to be a different framework, a different structure, even in your family, now that there's a lot of liquid wealth that exists relative to before. So change will come. Um, I think what's most important is that people take the time to consciously think about what they want and what they want to be, as opposed to just trying to get away from something, right? I'm stressed about my job. I can't deal with this anymore. I'm getting out. Um, Solves one problem, but creates in some ways an even bigger one on the other side.
Yeah.
That said, a lot of people, from my experience, don't spend a lot of time doing that mental preparation ahead of time, and they kind of get surprised when things change. And in fact, we find when we sell a business, about 50% of business owners, once things start really feeling real, will start doing some self-sabotage type behaviors, right? Because they're just that uncertainty of the new world is uncomfortable, right? As opposed to embracing it. And so on the one hand, you can look at it as a negative, right? Which is, oh, I got to reinvent myself and all that. On the other hand, it's an incredible opportunity, right? Here's an opportunity to hit reset, to say, there's very few times in your life absent, maybe leaving home for college for the first time, moving to a brand new city, by yourself, where you could basically totally reinvent yourself about who you are, how you're perceived, what is it that you really care about. And so, if you view it from that vantage point, it's an incredibly exciting opportunity to really hit reset and to design intentionally what you want. Do you want to work a lot less hours? Do you want to work in nonprofit? Do you want to teach? Whatever it might be, what is it that really juices you? Once money is taken out of the equation, that kind of really excites you to do what you do. Um, it's an incredible gift. That said, it's not easy, and most people just don't take the time to kind of reflect deeply enough. And so, interestingly, going back to the identity, um, there are a number of different books that cover that. Depression is actually very high amongst selling business owners, and the closest analogy that I uh, you know can identify is, if you look at Michael Phelps, he actually is the poster child of a psychological phenomenon called the arrival paradox, right? He won more golds than anybody in history, and yet he had a deep depression, because, from his vantage point, he's going from top of the world to back to doing laundry and kind of, living a traditional, life. And so, really, I think if you have the luxury of time to try to dissociate as much as possible your role from you as an individual ahead of time, it'll definitely make that process a whole lot easier. Um, but it's one of those things that, when you've got the luxury of falling back into your old ways with your business, um, you can try really hard, but it's relatively easy to fall into bad habits. Once you sell and you're on to the next thing, you have no choice but to confront the new reality. And what a lot of people really struggle with is they were the center of the universe. Everything depended upon them. Um, and it goes from 100 miles an hour to zero, potentially, right? Particularly if you walk away, completely. So it's one of those things that, sometimes people say, I can't take it anymore. And then be careful what you ask for, because, a lot of those things of feeling needed and appreciated and critical to the organization, were really important psychologically, to you. And so the earlier you can really kind of, um, engage with that and come up with, um, the path that really excites you, I think the easier the transition is. Because, when somebody sells a business to go focus on another business venture, they generally don't struggle with this, right? They already have their next identity and purpose,
Yeah.
um, already arranged.
Yeah. I love all of that, man. And I specifically really appreciate that perspective around, I can't remember how you phrased it, but in that answer, what I heard was like, make sure you're not just trying to get away from something. Like
Sure.
be be mindful enough, put a stake in the ground of where you are going and let that pull you forward. Because I know, I mean, even in my own journey, I was like, man, maybe I've got something I could sell, but wouldn't it just be nice to cash out and not have these problems? And it's not really pulling forward, because part of the journey is to go through the challenge, go through the growth, to figure out the skill set, the mindset that it takes to get to that level of exit. But to have that ability, reference it of like running through the finish line. Like, I'm just not going to this line. I'm like going through it, man. And where am I going to next kind of deal. So I just really appreciate how you frame that. It's super important.
Yeah, 100%.
David, for folks that are listening that might have some specific M&A type of questions, are interested in your book, want to reach out, connect, where are we finding you these days?
Yeah. So, obviously, my book is available, Selling Your Business with Confidence. And in terms of, contacting me, best way would be through LinkedIn. Uh, David, and last name is McCombie, McCombie. And, I can also give you my email if you want to post as well.
Awesome. We'll definitely have your website links and LinkedIn in our show notes. And I
Yeah.
encourage folks to reach out and connect with you. I really appreciated this conversation. I just kind of open-ended question, looking out at the next 5 years. Um, what are you excited for? What are you hopeful for? What kind of what's pulling you forward?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it's not about money. I realized, we're good. It's really about, um, for me, focusing on the two things that matter. One is my family. I have two young daughters, and I've spoken to a lot of successful older people. Not a single one has ever said that they wish they would have spent more time working. All of them said, "Hey, I wish I would have spent more time with my kids." Um, but I'm going to be working, right? And might as well work in something that really energizes me. And so, in a lot of ways, my strategy is driven by what is it, what does my job ideally look like, right? And so, for us in 5 years, and it's really the reason for the book, it's to attract, the entrepreneurs that really align with our vision and philosophy, and have a large amount of kind of inbound opportunities that we can then kind of very selectively choose where there's a really good fit. Because like I said, for me in my professional realm, I want to be able to learn and work with people I admire. And so, on that front, even if it's at a fraction of what I could make in something that doesn't provide that, that for me is success. Um, so, it's not this big grand vision of 100 million or whatever. It's more around, what is it that would make me feel fulfilled and excited on a day-to-day basis. And it's really around kind of two critical aspects of my life.
Yeah, I will put a little pin note and maybe a teaser because what you were speaking to as far as fit and alignment, I know is a really critical piece. Like if we are going to go shop our business or even if we're buying, like that fit and alignment is critical because
Yeah.
it's a long-term relationship. It's not just a grocery store transaction and you're never going to talk again. There is a long partnership there.
Yeah, if you don't mind on that point, a lot of people don't think about that. They think about buyers as a commodity, right? And everyone
Yeah.
being the same. And the reality is when you sell a middle market business, unlike in a home, real estate transaction, is an ongoing attachment between the buyer and seller, often for a minimum of 3 years and often, 7, 8+ years, whether it's earnouts, whether it's, consulting agreements, whether it's equity you may continue to hold in the business. And, in my opinion, life's too short to deal with people that you don't like and you don't trust. So it's imperative that you find that right fit. And often it's not because the buyers are bad people or ill-intentioned. It's just that they've got a different vision of where they want to go. They want to go left and you want to go right. And so I think it's equivalent, thinking about a buyer or a partner as a financial spouse. I think it's really important to ask those equivalent questions before you get married, right? You hopefully should be asking, do we want to have children or not, right? What religion do we want to practice? Just because you're on the same page on that doesn't guarantee a successful marriage, but the opposite almost guarantees it's not going to work out. And so I see too many people really focusing on what's the highest number that I can get and viewing everything as a commodity. What they're failing to realize is when they look back 2 or 3 years in the future and say, hey, am I happy with this or not? It's more about the life satisfaction that they have, right? And the relationship that they'll have with the buyer than it is around, oh, I got an extra 2%, 10%, whatever it is. So we're a strong believer when we represent sellers that, you try to date the different groups and identify who's the right fit, the top one or two, and use the competitive process to get them as high as possible. But the alternative of I'm just going to sell to the most expensive is really statistically a crapshoot that most likely is not going to turn out well.
Yeah, well said, man. David, I really appreciate your time today. Your knowledge and insights are super valuable, and I just appreciate this connection. So thanks for showing up.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I
Ladies and
appreciate it.
gentlemen, I would really appreciate it if you would help us continue the momentum that we have in subscribing, sharing, and liking our show. Let's extract really cool conversations with amazing people that are out crafting amazing businesses, relationships, lifestyles. So let's grow this thing together and just know that you are appreciated.